The front entrance to our house rarely sees any use. Instead, we usually enter through the garage's side door or the sliding glass doors leading to the patio. To the right of the front entryway is the formal living room, a space carefully kept in pristine condition but hardly ever used. On the left, at the end of the entry, there's a hallway that leads to 3 bedrooms, including our expansive master suite and the guest bathroom. The formal living room is perpetually shrouded in darkness, thanks to its heavy, closed curtains. The centerpiece is a white camelback sofa against the far wall, flanked by large wingback chairs, all arranged to face a walnut coffee table. While this room often feels insignificant, on that fateful day, it became the setting for a moment that would change everything. Late that morning, I found myself sitting in one of those wingback chairs, facing away from the arched doorway that connects the entryway to the living room. That chair had become my refuge, where I'd often sit to reflect on my life and weigh the potential fallout of Alice's absence. The thought of ending our turbulent marriage brought its own set of fears. Our shared friends dividing loyalties, losing our home, years of alimony payments, the abrupt evaporation of half my net worth, and the crushing legal fees. Despite all these concerns, one reality remained clear. Dealing with Alice, who I can only describe as vindictive, was an unavoidable struggle. As I sat there, lost in thought, the sound of the side door opening signaled her return from a grocery run. Panic set in. I should have pretended to be in the bedroom to sidestep another of her inevitable confrontations. Being caught in the living room would surely trigger one of her infamous tirades. Arguments with Alice were as predictable as they were exhausting. She'd often launch into fits of anger over insignificant issues, imaginary slights, or, sometimes, for no discernible reason at all. I recognized her behavior as a calculated strategy to keep me unsteady. Her fights could drag on for weeks, and I had learned to placate her at any cost, desperate to end the constant turmoil. The peace never lasted long, though. Another clash was always just around the corner. After a decade of this toxic cycle, I found myself trapped between 2 grim options: divorce or a quiet death. Yet, despite the hopelessness, I kept striving to make things better, less for Alice's benefit and more to preserve my own sanity. I heard the freezer door slam shut, signaling that Alice had finished putting away the frozen items. Bracing myself for her inevitable summons, I remained frozen in place, dreading her sharp orders or the piercing whistle she often used to call me, like a dog no less. That whistle grated on my nerves more than any words ever could. Instead of a shout, I heard the soft sound of her footsteps approaching the entryway. If I had dared to look, I would have seen her pausing on the tiled floor, scanning the hallway to confirm she was alone. I stayed perfectly still, my breathing shallow, as Alice stood there silently, weighing her next move. She called her father, or so I thought, her voice casual and cheerful as she finalized plans for Thursday afternoon. Listening from the chair, just 5 feet away, I couldn't help but notice something odd. Her tone was lighter, almost flirtatious, as she laughed and ended the call. The father she was speaking to couldn't be her real dad. He lived 1,000 miles away in California, and the area code on her phone was local. As her footsteps moved toward the sliding glass door, I could hear her whistle again, calling out as if she thought I was in the backyard working on the gazebo. Her obliviousness to my presence, as well as the pounding of blood in my ears, was almost surreal. Relying on instincts I had honed during my time in the Army, I knew better than to panic. Reacting in haste would only make things worse. Instead, I stood, controlled my breathing, and casually announced, "I'm here." I was in the bathroom. I need to run to the hardware store for some parts. Crossing the den, I avoided making eye contact with her, marveling at my composure as I walked past. My face must have been flushed because she commented on it, suggesting I wear a hat to avoid sunburn. Then, with her characteristic tone, she mentioned the groceries that still needed to be brought in and made sure to remind me not to be gone all day. After she stepped outside to inspect the gazebo, leaving behind her usual stream of complaints, I seized the chance to investigate. Picking up her phone from the kitchen counter, I quickly checked the last dial number and committed it to memory before returning the phone to her purse. After putting away the groceries, I left in my truck, but instead of heading to the hardware store, I parked at a nearby park. For the next 15 minutes, I replayed Alice's conversation in my head, dissecting every word and its implications. My conclusion was clear. My wife was having an affair, and the man she had just called Daddy was not her father. The gravity of this realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Was the man meeting her here in our home? In our bed? I felt like a fool, working tirelessly to support a woman who was openly betraying me. If this Daddy wasn't her actual father, who was he? In the early days of our marriage, Alice had sometimes used the term Daddy during intimate moments, a habit she had thankfully stopped. But now I realized it had likely meant something more sinister all along. Tom maintained his intense, unwavering gaze, prompting me to clarify my question. If I were to ask you something, I began, would you be able to keep our conversation between us? Tom replied cautiously, explaining that while he wouldn't volunteer any details to Clara, his wife, he wouldn't lie to her if she directly asked. It was his way of navigating loyalty to both me and his wife. Sensing that Tom was holding back, I decided to be blunt. Do you know anything about Alice having an affair? I asked, carefully rephrasing to ensure there was no ambiguity. Have you heard of anything she's doing now, or maybe something in the past? The floodgates opened. Tom recounted a shocking story from last New Year's Eve at the Holden's party. Everyone had been outside, eagerly awaiting the fireworks display, when Clara, unaccustomed to drinking, started feeling sick after a few glasses of champagne. She excused herself to use the upstairs bathroom. While she was inside, she noticed someone trying to turn the doorknob. After cleaning herself up, she stepped out and heard strange noises coming from the far end of the hallway near the bedrooms. Concerned that someone else might be unwell, she cautiously investigated. At the end of the hallway, Clara saw Alice pressed against the wall, her legs wrapped tightly around a large man, who Tom identified as Frank Morris. Clara froze in disbelief as Alice caught sight of her, smiled, and gave a dismissive wave as if to say, "Move along." Mortified, Clara returned downstairs and confided in Tom on the way home. Clara had later confronted Alice about the incident. Alice had brushed it off, blaming the situation on too much alcohol, an argument with me earlier that evening, and the aggressive advances of Frank, a notorious bully who had married into wealth. Alice assured Clara it was a one-time mistake. Despite her reservations, Clara decided to keep the matter quiet, hoping not to ruin our marriage over what Alice had claimed was an isolated lapse in judgment. Tom explained that Clara had reluctantly kept her silence under Alice's assurances, but he had always felt uneasy about it. I told Clara from the beginning, Tom said, if you ever came to me directly and asked, I wouldn't lie. I've been carrying the weight of this secret for months, and I'm sorry you had to hear it like this. Tom's next words hit me like a hammer. Unfortunately, this isn't over. I overheard Alice talking to Frank on the phone not long ago. Whatever you think ended has clearly continued. Determined to uncover the truth, we agreed to confront Clara together. Driving separately to their home, I mulled over everything I just learned. Clara, visibly shaken by Tom's revelation, listened intently as we filled her in. Tears welled up as she confessed her deep disappointment in Alice. She had genuinely believed Alice when she claimed the affair with Frank was over, and she'd tried to support our marriage based on that falsehood. Now, faced with evidence that Alice was still seeing Frank, Clara's disappointment turned into anger. I need your help, I said, leaning toward Clara. I found the number Alice called on her phone earlier today. Would you be willing to call it, pretend it's a wrong number, and see if you can get his name? I need to confirm whether she's still involved with Frank or someone else. Clara, a talented editor with a PhD in English literature and a background in theater, was the perfect choice for the job. She agreed without hesitation, her face set with quiet determination. Channeling her best English accent, she dialed the number while putting the phone on speaker. "Hi, this is Frank Morris," came the unmistakable voice on the other end. Clara blinked in astonishment. "Oh, I'm sorry," she replied with feigned embarrassment. "I must have dialed the wrong number." She ended the call, shaking her head. "Well, that wasn't exactly satisfying," she muttered. Though the confirmation was undeniable, Alice hadn't ended her affair with Frank. We discussed our next steps carefully. My goal was clear. I wanted undeniable proof of Alice's infidelity to confront her once and for all. With Thursday's planned meeting between Alice and Frank looming, I resolved to catch them in the act, ensuring I had every fact and piece of evidence at my disposal. Confronting her armed with irrefutable proof would expose the web of lies she had spun, and finally give me the clarity I needed to decide what came next. Reluctant to hire a private investigator due to the high cost and uncertainty of uncovering Alice's activities before Thursday, I searched for a quicker, more direct way to gather the evidence I needed. Clara, after a moment of deep thought, proposed an unconventional solution to Mole. She suggested that someone close to Alice, like herself, could extract the truth from her directly. I was skeptical at first, but Clara pressed on, her voice tinged with frustration. "Don't underestimate an angry woman," she said with conviction. "I've had enough of how she treats all of us. I can create a story that will compel her to spill everything." Over the next hour, we meticulously devised a plan. Clara would urgently call Alice, feigning a desperate need for advice, and arrange to meet her for coffee on Sunday morning. Meanwhile, Tom would retrofit one of Clara's old purses with a hidden video camera to record every word and expression. By midday Sunday, we hoped to have undeniable evidence. Clara wasted no time. She called Alice, alluding to a situation reminiscent of the New Year's party, and successfully secured a meeting. Alice, intrigued by Clara's apparent newfound assertiveness, eagerly agreed. On Sunday morning, Clara arrived early at the coffee shop, choosing a quiet table beneath an awning. She carefully arranged the purse with its concealed camera, ensuring the best angle and conducting a quick audio test to verify it captured sound clearly. The calm weather meant there would be no wind noise, and the one-button recording system Tom had set up worked flawlessly. The camera, cleverly hidden among the purse's intricate patterns, could hold hours of footage thanks to its 16 gigabytes card. When Alice arrived, Clara greeted her warmly and asked her to grab coffee for both of them, claiming she'd save their spot. As Alice walked away, Clara discreetly pressed the recording button and confirmed the setup was working. When Alice returned with their drinks, they exchanged pleasantries and quickly transitioned to the fabricated story Clara had prepared. Clara explained her dilemma, sharing that a charming and attractive man had recently expressed interest in her. She confessed that it had been a long time since she and Tom had been intimate, and while she'd never cheated, she admitted to feeling tempted. She wanted Alice's advice, particularly regarding how Alice had felt after her mistake at the New Year's party. Alice didn't hesitate. "Go for it, girl. Honestly, I can't believe you haven't done this already," she said with an almost giddy enthusiasm. "Tom's a nice guy, but let's be real. He's way past his prime. You're still young and gorgeous. I've always admired your looks, but I've never understood why you waste your time with him." Clara, taken aback by Alice's lack of remorse, pressed further. "But wasn't the New Year's party just a one-time thing?" she asked, feigning curiosity. Alice laughed dismissively. "Oh, honey, I had to say that back then because you might have run your mouth. But now that you're in the same boat, we can talk about it openly." Alice leaned inconspiratorially. "In fact, I'm so into this now that I'm thinking of doing it again. You wouldn't believe how good it feels." Intrigued, Clara asked Alice to elaborate. "How did it even start with you and Frank? Are you still seeing him?" she asked. Alice's eyes sparkled as she dove into the details. "Oh, it started at the Holden's Halloween party a couple of months before New Year's," she began. "Frank was watching me all night. When I stepped away, we ended up meeting on the landing, and from there, things just escalated. We ended up in the bathroom, and let me tell you, it was intense." Alice recounted her encounter with Frank in vivid detail, emphasizing his qualities and unabashedly admitting that their relationship was ongoing. "We're meeting next week," she added with a sly grin. "In my own bed, no less." Feigning concern, Clara asked about me, David, and whether Alice ever felt guilty. Alice waved the idea off with a scoff. "David? Oh, please. Husbands aren't lovers. They serve entirely different purposes. David's there to do what I need. Pay the bills, follow orders, and keep the house running. Frank? He's there for the good stuff. The passion. Alice explained how she had managed to keep me oblivious to her infidelity. Diversionary tactics, she said smugly. If David checks for perfume or anything, I make sure to spin it back on him. He thinks I'd never cheat because I've trained him to see me as untouchable. Then, with a mocking laugh, Alice compared me to a little gay friend. He's docile, easy to control, and always eager to please. It's like having a helper who thinks he's indispensable, she said, her voice dripping with derision. Alice explained the sense of control she felt, knowing my predictable habits and never having to worry about being caught with a lover. Clara, steering the conversation, asked if Alice had been with others besides Frank. Alice responded with a casual laugh. I've lost count, she admitted. The first one was during our first year of marriage. I picked him up in a supermarket. He never even knew my real name, and we shuffled between hotel rooms for 6 months, until he got too clingy. Alice recounted her escapades with ease. You have to be careful with younger guys. They can be needy, she added, smirking. After that, there were countless one-night stands, including a salesman who had a penchant for kink. That worked out well, Alice explained, since he only came to town a few times a year. She then turned to Frank, describing him as a hound with a tool to split wood, and confessed that she had kept him entertained longer than most. She detailed Frank's situation, a clueless wife, Marie, working hard while he fooled around. Alice reveled in her ability to dictate when Frank could visit her, claiming control over the entire arrangement. Shifting the conversation, Alice asked Clara about her new conquest. Clara, sticking to her fabricated story, described a fictional man named Rod. While the details were unimportant, Alice believed every word and cheered her on. You should enjoy every moment, girl, Alice said. You'll see, it's liberating. Clara feigned amazement at Alice's level of control, expressing doubt about her ability to treat Tom the way Alice treated me. Alice laughed and launched into an analogy about dominance in the animal kingdom. I'm the alpha, she declared proudly. David fits into his natural role. If you want freedom, you have to do the same with Tom. Alice encouraged Clara to explore her relationship with Rod, assuring her that Tom would stay submissive, no matter what. She even touched on practical concerns, such as STDs and contraceptives. Clara, still acting her part, mentioned that she typically insisted on protection, but had been lax with Frank due to his aggressive nature. Alice admitted to a close call herself, laughing off an incident when she contracted gonorrhea. I just told David I needed antibiotics for a UTI, she said with a deadpan expression, dismissing any guilt. After ensuring she had gathered enough evidence, Clara ended the meeting, thanked Alice for her advice, and left the coffee shop. Once home, Clara and Tom reviewed the footage together, horrified. I can't even recognize her, Clara said, shaking her head. She was never this cold to David in front of anyone. When they showed me the video, I sat in stunned silence. While I had suspected Alice was capable of betrayal, seeing her unfiltered and ruthless was a gut punch. Clara brought up Marie Morris, voicing her concerns about whether Marie knew the truth about Frank's infidelity. She debated whether telling Marie about Alice and Frank was the right move, worried that such a revelation might blow our cover. Clara described Marie as deeply unhappy, likely beaten down by Frank's bullying reputation. She speculated that Marie might already know or suspect, but felt powerless to act. After much discussion, Clara decided to contact Marie directly, reasoning that she deserved to know the truth. That evening, Clara called Marie and introduced herself. We've talked a few times at the Holden's parties, Clara began, her voice calm but serious. I wanted to ask if you have a moment to talk privately. Once Marie confirmed she was alone, Clara carefully broached the subject. I hate to be the one to tell you this, she said gently, but Frank is having an affair with someone I know. The silence on the other end was deafening. Clara could hear faint sniffles, followed by quiet sobbing. Finally, Marie spoke, her voice trembling. She explained how Frank had promised to change after a previous affair a year ago. I took him back, Marie confessed, her voice breaking. But I warned him one more time, and we're done. Marie listened intently, her voice steady but filled with resolve. She explained that if Frank repeated his betrayal, their relationship would be over for good. "He'll never share my bed again," she stated coldly, outlining the strict prenuptial agreement they had in place. According to its terms, Frank would be left penniless if infidelity was proven, a provision she had insisted on. Marie described Frank as entirely unfit for meaningful work, good only for accompanying her to social events and indulging in his extramarital affairs. But this time, she was determined to ensure he faced the consequences of his actions. When I offered my help in gathering evidence, Marie accepted, committing to remain composed until she had tangible proof in hand. Plans were set for her to receive the necessary evidence. Clara coordinated a meeting between Marie and me, arranging for us to meet at her office the following Monday at 1 p.m. When the time came, I arrived at Clara's office, carrying the video evidence. After introducing myself to Marie, I placed the camera on the desk, cued the relevant section of the footage, and hit play. Although the screen was small, the audio quality was clear and undeniable. Marie's tears welled up as she listened to Alice and Frank's brazen conversation. In a quiet gesture of comfort, I reached out to her, acknowledging the pain of confirming what she already suspected about her husband's behavior over the years. After the recording ended, I outlined my plans for Thursday and extended an invitation for Marie to participate, making it clear her involvement was entirely optional. Marie, her voice filled with years of pent-up frustration, shared her desire to turn the tables on Frank and make him feel the pain he had caused her. She admitted to enduring years of intimidation, but now saw an opportunity to reclaim her power. When she asked about the potential for violence, I assured her that while things might get messy, I had no intention of causing lasting harm. As the meeting concluded, I returned to work, though my productivity was nearly non-existent. Alice's words from the video haunted me, gnawing at my thoughts. I couldn't entirely dismiss the truths embedded in her remarks, particularly her perception of me as overly accommodating. Her comments stung, but they also motivated me. I decided that Thursday would be the day to show her, and myself, that I could stand my ground. The following days, Tuesday and Wednesday, passed in a haze of preparation. I meticulously considered every possible scenario, mindful of how quickly even the best-laid plans could unravel. My thoughts felt like a chessboard filled with countless moving pieces, each decision leading to branching outcomes. I mentally rehearsed, knowing that improvisation would be critical when Thursday arrived. Meanwhile, at home, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Conversations with Alice were sparse and limited to necessities. Her usual assertiveness seemed muted as she observed my behavior, clearly trying to assess what was going on and regain control of the situation. Ironically, while I prepared for confrontation, Alice seemed to be looking forward to her planned encounter with Frank. She likely anticipated the thrill and sense of control that meeting would provide. On Tuesday night, while Alice was in the shower, I searched my dresser drawers for an old keepsake my grandfather had passed down to me. Both my father and grandfather had served in the military, and Grandpa had brought back a unique souvenir from Normandy, a pair of steel knuckles he had acquired from a German soldier. As I held the cold, menacing steel, I recalled Grandpa's stern words about using them only as a last resort. "This isn't a toy," he had said, "but sometimes life will corner you, and you'll need every tool you have." That day felt closer than ever. This was a battle, a war really, against Alice and her lover's underhanded games. Thursday morning arrived, and I forced myself to eat a hearty breakfast, knowing I'd likely skip lunch. I needed the energy to stay sharp and focused. After pacing in my office for a while, I moved some items to the guest bedroom, preparing for the confrontation. Whether Alice stayed in the backyard or returned inside after opening the gate for Frank, I knew I could adapt my approach. On my desk sat the steel knuckles. I picked them up, testing their weight in my hand, feeling the controlled anger simmering within me. By 1 o'clock, I had changed into jeans, a t-shirt, and sturdy running shoes, ready for whatever might unfold. I checked my pockets. Cell phone, keys, knuckles, wallet. Everything was in place. To preempt any suspicion, I called Alice from my desk phone. The conversation was calm, devoid of any threat or tension. I explained I had meetings and calls to handle, setting the stage for what was to come. Alice interpreted my call as a sign of submission, a return to my usual accommodating nature. She seemed to relax, likely imagining this meant I'd be seeking reconciliation later that evening. Perhaps, in her mind, she'd even reward me with some cool-down intimacy to soothe my supposed docility. Unbeknownst to her, I had other plans. As the clock ticked toward her secret rendezvous, Alice prepared to meet Frank. Marie dropped him off at the park, as planned, and he jogged to his house before slipping into our backyard through the side gate. I had positioned myself behind a fatina bush at the far end of the house, away from the garage, my heart pounding as I checked the time on my muted phone. At 1:45, Alice emerged into the backyard wearing a string bikini, her carefree attitude like salt in an open wound. She unlocked the back gate, scanned the alley for Frank, and then returned to a lounge chair under the pecan tree. This was my signal. Keeping to the shadows, I slipped through the side gate I had intentionally left ajar, circled to the front door, and unlocked it with my key. Entering the house, I passed the spot where Alice's betrayal had first come to light days earlier. Moving quickly to the spare room, I grabbed a cordless drill and some hardware, then entered the master bedroom. In less than a minute, I installed a hasp on the inside of the door and left a lock hanging from it. As a precaution, I wedged a small piece of wood between the door edge and the jamb to ensure it couldn't fully close, just in case Alice tried to shut it. Adrenaline surging, I hurried to the guest room, picked up the video camera, slipped the brass knuckles onto my right hand, and waited. The anticipation was excruciating. So many things could have gone wrong. Alice might have unlocked the gate too soon, or Frank might have arrived earlier than expected. But, thankfully, the pieces fell into place exactly as planned. I steadied my breathing, preparing for the confrontation on my terms. Peering through the slightly open guest bedroom door, I positioned the video camera to capture the hallway. Though the dim lighting might compromise the video's quality, the audio would be undeniable. At last, I heard the sliding glass door move, and Alice's laughter mingled with a deep, masculine growl. Imagining Frank's hands on her sent a surge of rage through me, but I stayed still, waiting for the right moment. Through the camera lens, I saw Alice, her bikini top already discarded, entering the master bedroom with Frank. They didn't bother to close the door. I followed quietly, recording every moment. Kneeling near the doorway, I placed the camera on the dresser, ensuring it captured the scene unfolding on the bed. The hardest part was holding back, letting the evidence pile up as my anger simmered beneath the surface. Alice and Frank, now fully undressed, took their time. I heard Alice refer to Frank as Daddy, confirming my suspicions about her twisted inclinations. The sight of them together fueled my resolve. Frank's voice grew eager, and when I peeked again, I saw him between Alice's legs. Then came the plunge, accompanied by Alice's loud, shameless scream. Their movements became rhythmic, their voices filled with curses and unintelligible sounds. I had seen enough. Touching the brass knuckles for luck, I silently approached the bed. Alice noticed me first, her eyes widening in horror. I lunged at Frank, driving the brass knuckles into his ribs and shoving him off the bed. Alice screamed, her voice a mix of rage and panic, accusing Frank of violating her, an absurd and desperate ploy. Frank, shocked and disoriented, quickly reverted to his bullying demeanor, rising to confront me. I stepped back slightly, baiting him as he came around the far corner of the bed. Alice, now on her knees clutching the covers, yelled at me to leave and not hurt Frank. But I was far past listening to her. Planting my trailing foot, I took a running step forward and hurled myself into Frank's chest. The brass knuckles struck his solar plexus with precision, and we crashed to the floor, my full weight driving the air from his lungs. Frank's face twisted in panic as he struggled to breathe, emitting a high-pitched whine. He pushed against me, trying to dislodge my hold, but his movements were weak and frantic. His eyes filled with terror as his body began to betray him, and I could see that his focus had shifted entirely to survival. Straddling his chest, I held my ground, ready for what came next. Frank lay on the floor, his bloodied hands weakly pressing against it as he struggled to find a position that might help him breathe. His wheezing and gurgling filled the room. Without hesitation, I raised my right hand high and brought the steel-enforced fist down directly onto the center of Frank's horrified face with all the strength I could muster. With no room for his head to recoil, the blow landed with a sickening crunch, and blood immediately gushed from his shattered nose. His mouth and throat filled with blood, leaving him utterly incapacitated. Standing over his limp body, I felt a cold satisfaction, but ensured I didn't let that escalate into recklessness. Ignoring Alice's screams, I began to walk toward the door. Her desperate cries for help turned into a pleading wail as she realized what I was doing. I stopped when I heard her begging for me not to leave. Pausing for a moment, I reached down, removed the small wood piece wedging the door open, and let it shut with a decisive click. I locked the hasp, turning to face Alice. Her initial fury morphed into pure panic as the reality of our situation set in. She was trapped, naked and vulnerable, with this new, unpredictable version of her husband. "David! Oh, David!" Alice cried, her voice trembling. "This isn't what it looks like. He forced me into this. Frank's a bully. He threatened to hurt me, and you too. He said he'd destroy you if I didn't go along with it. I didn't want this." I approached her slowly, her words bouncing off me like hollow echoes. Maintaining a stone-cold demeanor, I cut her off. "Shut up," I said sternly. "You're lying. I know you've been with him for months." Turning my attention back to Frank, I assessed his condition. He was still gurgling, blood pooling on the floor beneath him. I crouched beside him and adjusted his position, ensuring he was on his side to allow for proper drainage. I didn't want him to die. Not yet. From the top drawer of the dresser, I retrieved 5 pairs of handcuffs and secured Frank's wrists and ankles to the iron bed frame. He wasn't going anywhere. With Frank restrained, I turned back to Alice. She was trembling, her eyes darting between me and the brass knuckles on my right hand. I pulled her legs off the bed, cuffed her hands behind her back, and guided her to the bathroom. Seating her on the toilet, I loomed over her and issued a harsh command. "Now's the time for the truth, Alice. Start talking. I want to know everything. How you met him, why you thought this was acceptable, and every man you've been with over the last 10 years. We have all afternoon." Alice hesitated, weighing her options. She must have realized there was no point in trying to downplay the situation or manipulate me further. The weight of her choices seemed to settle on her as she began to speak, her tone filled with calculated remorse. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. "It started with Frank. He approached me at a party. I didn't know what he wanted at first, but he was so aggressive. Before I knew it, we were upstairs, and it just happened. I didn't have anyone to help me." I folded my arms and stared at her, unimpressed. "What party was that?" I asked sharply. She faltered, her mind scrambling for an answer. It was the Holdens," she said. "The New Year's party." I shook my head. "Don't lie to me. It was Halloween, and it wasn't just once. It's been over 20 times. Who told me? Was it Frank? Maybe one of your other lovers?" Her eyes flashed with defiance. "You'd be surprised how many people might have talked," she spat. "Maybe it was one of Frank's friends. Or maybe it was Clara." "Yeah, Clara told you, didn't she?" "I'll claw her eyes out. But you know what? I have dirt on her too. I'll destroy her marriage if she comes after me." When I didn't react, Alice smirked, regaining some of her composure. "Oh, and by the way," she added smugly, "that little story she fed you about her lover, Elliot, that was all me. I planted that idea in her head." Alice took credit for crafting the fictional Elliot character, explaining how she and Clara had orchestrated their conversations to probe and extract information from me. She smugly detailed how Clara had recorded everything, duplicating the exchange onto multiple DVDs for safekeeping, ready to be shared at her discretion. Alice clarified that Clara hadn't initially shared the details of her betrayal or the New Year's party revelation directly, leaving her to piece together her own version of events. I countered, reminding Alice that her own phone call last Saturday in the entryway, when she openly expressed affection for Frank, had revealed far more than she realized. Her careless words had inadvertently disclosed her extensive history, leaving no doubt in my mind. Feeling I had all the information I needed, I told her that any further communication should be directed to my lawyer, and that legal papers would be served within a few days. I pulled out my phone and called Marie, who had been waiting outside in her car, to inform her the situation was ready to be addressed. After a brief, light-hearted exchange, I ended the call and marched Alice back into the bedroom. I forced her to look at Frank, undressed, handcuffed, wheezing, and bleeding on the floor. The sight made Alice gag, nearly causing her to vomit. I deposited her on the bed, turned off the video camera, unlocked the bedroom door, and opened it for Marie. "Well, Marie," I said with a wry smile, "I saved you a little bit of him. Though I'll warn you, his face isn't much to look at now. And here's his latest conquest, my soon-to-be ex-wife. Alice, do you have anything to say to her?" Marie walked into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, and without hesitation, delivered a sharp slap to Alice's left cheek. The impact evened out the redness already forming from her earlier pleas. "You absolute fool," Marie snapped, her voice filled with frustration. She turned her attention briefly to Frank, lying helplessly on the floor, before addressing me. "What are we going to do with him now?" I smirked. "Honestly, I'm inclined to toss this one out the door without his clothes and see how long it takes him to find another companion." I paused, letting the sarcasm settle. "Or I could use that razor-sharp hunting knife I just bought, maybe cut off his prized possession, and gift it to Alice since she seems so attached to it. What do you think, Marie? Should I stash the rest of him in a vault to keep the women in this town safe?" Marie let out a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in her tone. "Let's keep it civil for now. Let's get him to a hospital, make up a story about finding him injured in your garage. He'll cooperate, knowing what's at stake." I nodded, the tension in the room palpable. Turning my attention back to Alice, I mentioned her relationship with her father, implying there might be deeper issues rooted in her upbringing. "I wonder if there's more to your attachment to your father," I mused. "Who knows? Maybe that's where some of this began. And in case you've forgotten, he disinherited your sister to protect the family's reputation. Do you think he'd hesitate to do the same to you?" As the weight of my words settled on her, I let Alice know she could get dressed and leave. I handed her a single quarter and sarcastically remarked, "This should be enough for a two-bit fancy woman like you." I added that her ATM and credit cards were already deactivated. "Find a place to think about what you've done." After Alice left, Marie and I shared a moment of silent camaraderie. Over the following months, we maintained a distant but supportive friendship, reaching out occasionally when loneliness struck. Neither of us felt ready to trust again after being so deeply burned. Reflecting on my actions, I couldn't ignore the harshness of how I had treated Alice during that confrontation. It wasn't the person I wanted to be, but in moments of war, physical or emotional, cruelty has a way of surfacing. Still, I had no regrets about marring Frank's face. Marie's insurance covered the necessary repairs to his appearance, and she cut him loose with slightly more money than the prenuptial agreement required. In the months that followed, Frank struggled to regain the confidence to attract new partners. Meanwhile, Alice settled for a modest legal settlement and moved in with her sister. Stripped of her old life, she sought help to cope with the enormity of her mistakes. Nature documentaries featuring predators, terms like alpha dog and pecking order, triggered waves of discomfort and recurring nightmares about that fateful night. Though she occasionally missed me, I harbored no such feelings for her. Life moved on. The scars of betrayal remained, but I knew one thing for sure: I'd never allow myself to be in that position again.